Ivy Morgan stepped into the lobby of a small branch of Morgan Trust, a bank she had established years ago. It was late afternoon, and the sun hung low in the sky, casting elongated shadows across the polished marble floors. The automatic doors swept open as she entered, her sneakers tapping lightly against the ground as she draped a relaxed blazer over her shoulders. Today she wasn't on any grand mission or meeting high-profile investors. She was there simply to withdraw from her personal account. After all, this was Morgan Trust, the institution Ivy had built from the ground up. She had started the bank with the conviction that fairness and accessibility were the cornerstones of exceptional service. Over the years, she steered it through numerous challenges, while always ensuring that customers received the respect they deserved. This branch was a key part of her vision. She had personally approved its location, overseen its inauguration, and even cut the ribbon at the opening ceremony. Today, however, Ivy wore no tailored suit or high heels. She intended to blend in as just another customer, dressed down in casual attire. Approaching the counter with a calm, neutral demeanor, she made it clear that she wasn't there to flaunt her authority or demand special treatment. She merely wished to confirm that her bank remained as fair as it had always promised to be. The young teller behind the counter did not immediately greet her. Instead, she cast a brief glance before returning her focus to the computer screen. Clearing her throat to catch the teller's attention, Ivy said, "Hi, I'd like to make a withdrawal," her voice measured and even. The teller, named Alexis Pierce, didn't look up but slid a clipboard across the counter. "Please complete this form," she said, not sparing Ivy a second glance. The form was basic: name, account number, and withdrawal amount. Ivy quickly filled it out, recording an amount of $5,000. Though not a vast sum, it was enough to warrant the bank's identity checks. Once Ivy returned the completed form, she noticed a change in Alexis's demeanor. The teller's eyes flicked over the document, then to Ivy's ID, and finally back to the computer screen. A subtle, uncomfortable shift filled the air. "Could you hold on for a moment?" Alexis asked hesitantly. She took Ivy's ID and disappeared behind a frosted glass door leading to the back office. Standing quietly, Ivy's fingers drummed lightly on the marble counter. She had expected to be treated with courtesy, yet this treatment felt different. A few minutes later, Alexis returned, accompanied by Victor Grant, the branch manager. "Good afternoon, Ms. Morgan," Victor said stiffly, his smile rigid, as he briefly surveyed her before zeroing in on the withdrawal form. "I understand you're withdrawing $5,000 from your account." Ivy nodded. "Yes." Victor hesitated. "May I take another look at your ID?" A flicker of irritation sparked in Ivy. "I already handed it to Alexis," she replied evenly, her tone both steady and firm. Ignoring her comment, Victor held the ID up to the light, as if scrutinizing it for any signs of discrepancy, even though Ivy had been a loyal customer for many years. After a pause, Victor asked, "May I ask what you do for a living, Ms. Morgan?" Ivy's jaw tensed. "I run a bank," she stated sharply, her voice gaining a sharper edge. Victor nodded slowly, and, glancing briefly at Alexis, continued, "Is this a personal account, or is it a business account?" Ivy's patience was wearing thin. "It's clearly indicated on the form," she replied coolly. Victor continued to examine her ID as though searching for subtle clues of inauthenticity, his actions seemingly more about asserting control than ensuring protocol. The lobby had quieted noticeably. The usual bustle of customers was replaced by an uneasy stillness. Although Ivy's irritation was mounting, she maintained her composed exterior, refusing to reveal her inner frustration. Before long, Victor spoke again. "I see. And you mentioned you're withdrawing $5,000, he said slowly, as if the amount itself required justification. "Could you tell me what line of work you're in, Ms. Morgan?" Taken aback by the redundant inquiry, Ivy's stomach tightened. What's the point of repeating what's obvious, she thought. "I manage a bank. I founded Morgan Trust, in fact." Her voice carried a note of exasperation as she reiterated, "I run a bank?" The branch manager hesitated, then asked another pointed question. "What type of bank is this?" Ivy's grip on the counter tightened as she took a deep breath, striving to maintain her composure. This was no longer a routine security check. It felt more like an interrogation, laced with judgment. "I own this bank," she replied firmly. A moment of silence ensued as Victor absorbed her words. The atmosphere grew even thicker. Ivy could sense that his line of questioning wasn't driven by concern for security, but rather by a desire to undermine her presence. "So, you're withdrawing $5,000 from your personal account?" Victor repeated slowly, his eyes narrowing as they scanned Ivy's face, searching for a sign of weakness. "Yes," Ivy confirmed, meeting his gaze with unwavering steadiness. "You've seen the form. Everything is in order. What's the issue?" Instead of answering, Victor methodically flipped the form in his hands, as though hunting for a non-existent error. Ivy was convinced he wasn't seeking a mistake. He was simply looking for any excuse to question her right to access her own funds. The tension was palpable, and while her frustration was nearly overwhelming, Ivy held her ground. Finally, Victor looked up, his expression unchanging as he said, "I'm going to need you to verify some additional information before we can proceed with the withdrawal." Ivy blinked, perplexed. "Additional information? I've already provided my ID, the completed form, and my account number. What more do you need?" Victor hesitated a moment before asking the question that pushed Ivy to her limit. "Can you tell me the amount of your last deposit into this account?" Ivy's jaw set firmly. This wasn't standard procedure, especially not for a withdrawal as modest as $5,000, and certainly not for someone who had been with the bank since its inception. "I don't have that number memorized," Ivy responded calmly, "but you have my account number. You can retrieve that information like any other customer." Despite her words, Victor simply nodded, his eyes still calculating, as if he were determined to find a reason to delay the transaction. Ivy felt the oppressive weight of the moment. It was clear this wasn't about policy. It was about proving something as unfathomable as her right to be there. "We take security very seriously," Victor finally said, his tone rehearsed, "and it's just a precaution." Ivy's voice sharpened. "A precaution? What exactly are you implying?" Without offering any real explanation, Victor reached for a clipboard and said, "It's just procedure. We need to reconfirm that you are indeed the account holder before processing the withdrawal." Ivy's mind raced. She had been coming to this branch for years. She had launched it herself, signed off on every detail, from the hiring of staff to the inaugural ribbon cutting. There was no doubt about her identity or her access to her funds. "You're telling me that my ID, my account number, and my entire history with this bank aren't sufficient?" she asked, her voice edged with incredulity. "You're forcing me to prove that I'm entitled to my own money?" Victor's expression didn't waver as he replied, "It's just procedure." His detached tone did little to soothe the growing tension. Ivy's eyes narrowed. She had been patient long enough. "This is ridiculous," she stated firmly. "I've been with this bank since day one. I helped launch this branch, and now you're making me prove that I belong here." Victor's features remained impassive, yet Ivy noticed a subtle shift in his demeanor, a fleeting hint of discomfort. For the first time, it seemed he realized that this wasn't merely a miscommunication, but an unnecessary and baseless challenge to her authority. Glancing at Alexis, who had grown uneasy and shifted nervously behind Victor, Ivy pressed on. "Look, you're withdrawing $5,000 from your personal account," Victor repeated slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Is that correct?" "Yes," Ivy replied, her voice steady despite the tension that roiled beneath the surface. "As shown on the form, everything is in order. So what's the problem?" Victor's silence was telling. He continued to turn the form over in his hands, as if trying to divine a hidden error. Ivy could only feel her frustration build. Finally, he looked up and said, "I'm going to need some additional verification before proceeding." Ivy's confusion deepened. "I already provided all necessary documents, my ID, my account details, and my history with Morgan Trust. What else is there?" Without waiting for her protest, Victor leaned in and asked the question that sealed Ivy's mounting exasperation. "Can you recall the amount of your last deposit?" Her jaw tightened noticeably at the question, one that wasn't part of any standard procedure for a withdrawal of this size. "I don't have that number memorized," she reiterated coolly. "But you have every other detail you need. This doesn't add up." The air between them thickened as Victor's eyes remained calculating. "We adhere strictly to security protocols," he insisted, his tone unnervingly detached, as though reciting a script. Ivy's heart raced. What was happening was not about maintaining protocol. It was an affront, a deliberate test. "Let me make something absolutely clear," she said, her voice rising with controlled anger. "You are denying me a simple withdrawal from my personal account, even after I have provided all the requisite identification, and you're resorting to involving security, as if I were some disruptive element, simply because I'm not wearing a suit." At that moment, Victor's mask of professionalism began to slip. He tried to speak, but Ivy interjected sharply. "I won't listen to any more excuses." Her tone was icy. "I helped build this bank. I am the reason this branch exists. I personally approved your hiring, Victor, and now you're treating me as if I don't belong here." Victor's face drained of color as the weight of her words settled over him. Ivy could see the panic forming in his eyes. In a final, desperate maneuver, he reached under the counter and pressed a button that sent a silent alert to security, a clear escalation. Ivy understood all too well what this signified. Moments later, a tall security officer in uniform stepped into the lobby, his demeanor impassive, though his hand hovered near his belt. Yet Ivy remained unfazed. "Really, Victor?" she asked coolly. "Is this your idea of ensuring a smooth experience for your customers?" Victor's voice wavered as he replied, "We just want to ensure everything runs smoothly for everyone here." His answer was overly polished, too rehearsed. Ivy raised an eyebrow. "A smooth experience? I'll tell you something. I'm not leaving until you process my withdrawal. And if you think I will allow you to treat me like a second-class citizen, you've got another thing coming." The lobby grew even quieter as Ivy's words resonated among the onlookers. customers and staff alike, who now watched the unfolding drama with a mix of horror and fascination. With a steady gaze, she declared, "You've made a serious error in judgment. Today, you're denying me access to my funds, and I am not going to stand idly by." She pulled out her phone and began recording the entire confrontation, ensuring the incident was documented for posterity. As if sensing the shifting tide, Ivy shifted the camera slightly, catching the security officer, who had been silently observing, and adding, "And you, explain your presence here. What exactly is your role in all this?" The officer, caught off guard, hesitated before responding in a measured yet uncertain tone. "I'm here to ensure everything proceeds as it should." "Ensure everything proceeds," Ivy echoed, her voice laced with disbelief. "Or are you here to intimidate me and remind me of my place?" The security officer fidgeted under her unyielding gaze, his discomfort palpable. Victor, now visibly unsettled, fumbled for words, but ultimately remained silent. Ivy took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I have shown you my ID, provided the correct account number, and confirmed my long-standing history with Morgan Trust. Yet you've chosen to ignore all of that and treat me as though I am not entitled to my own money." At that moment, Victor's facade began to crumble. In a final act of defiance, Ivy stepped forward and said, "Let me introduce myself properly." She reached for the ID that had been placed on the counter earlier, turning it slowly so that the printed name was unmistakably visible. "This isn't just any ID. It belongs to the founder and CEO of Morgan Trust." The revelation struck Victor like a blow. The room fell silent. Ivy noted the way the security officer straightened up, the way Alexis's face lost its color, and the way customers shifted uncomfortably. Victor's hand trembled as he reached for the ID, but it was too late. Ivy had reclaimed control of the situation. "I built this bank from the ground up," Ivy continued, her voice unwavering. "I authorized the very budget that secured your position, Victor. And today I walked in not as a VIP or a dignitary, but simply as a customer, and you treated me as if I were invisible. You humiliated me, lied to me, and now you have a choice. Process my transaction immediately or face the consequences." Victor opened his mouth as if to object, but no words emerged. His once commanding presence had been shattered. "You had your chance," Ivy said softly, but with fierce determination. "Now you're going to explain this debacle to headquarters." Turning to the security officer, she added coldly, "And you, if a customer isn't disruptive, the first response shouldn't be to intimidate. You need to be more discerning about whose orders you follow." The security officer offered a small, uncomfortable nod, clearly aware that he had overstepped. Finally, Ivy fixed her gaze on Alexis, who had been silent throughout most of the ordeal. "You saw my ID, my account number, and everything else. You still chose to disregard me," Ivy stated, her tone soft, yet commanding. "Protocol only seems to apply to people who aren't in my position." Alexis's face flushed as she tried to muster an explanation, but no words came. She simply stared at her register with trembling hands. After a long, silent pause, Ivy took another deliberate step forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor as if to punctuate each word. With finality, she announced, "I'm leaving now." The weight of her declaration echoed around the room, and as she stepped through the door, she knew that nothing would ever be the same. The fallout from that day was swift and unmistakable. By the next morning, Ivy had called an emergency meeting with her leadership team. Every branch manager was summoned for an urgent review of customer service policies. Victor, the branch manager, was terminated on the spot, and mandatory sensitivity training was rolled out across every branch of Morgan Trust. The changes were immediate. Employees grew more conscientious about their conduct. Customers started noticing the transformation, and Ivy ensured that this was no temporary fix, but a lasting commitment to fairness. That day had served as a stark reminder. Lasting change does not spring solely from written policies. It is forged when someone stands up against injustice, refuses to accept inequity, and insists on a better, more respectful way of doing things. Ivy Morgan had taken that stand, and in doing so, had redefined the very essence of Morgan Trust.